Good morning. My name is Reverend Dr. Ron Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to the Sunday morning celebration for the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast. I'm sure we all know that this weekend is Memorial Day weekend, where we celebrate and remember the lives of all of those who have gone before us and sacrificed themselves so you and I may live in a free country. So we'd like to begin our service this morning by honoring them. And my wife, Becky, who is a practitioner emeritus, is going to read two beautiful stories that we dedicate to all of those who have fallen.
The first one is a letter that was written by Sullivan Ballou. And this was written on July 14th, 1861 in Camp Clark, Washington. A letter to his wife, Sarah. My very dear Sarah, the indications are very strong that we shall move in a few days, perhaps tomorrow. Lest I should not be able to write again, I feel impelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eye when I shall be no more. I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how strongly American civilization now leans on the triumph of the government and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence could break. And yet, my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me unresistibly onto the battlefield. The memories of the blissful moments I've spent with you come creeping over me, and I feel most grateful to God and to you that I have enjoyed them so long. And hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes the hopes of future years when, God willing, we might still have lived and loved together and seen our sons grown up in honorable manhood. I have but few and small claims upon divine providence, but something whispers to me. Perhaps it is the wafted prayer of my little Edgar, that I shall return to my loved ones unharmed. If I do not, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I love you. And when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults and the many pains I have caused you. How thoughtless and foolish I have oftentimes been. How gladly would I wash out with my tears every little spot upon your happiness. But, oh Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those that they loved, I shall always be near you in the gladdest days and in the darkest nights. Always, always. And if there be a soft breeze upon your cheeks, it shall be my breath. As the cool air fans your throbbing temple, it shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me dead, but think of me as gone and waiting for thee, for we shall meet again. Sullivan Ballou was killed at the first battle of Bull Run. The next reading I'd like to read is written by John Pavlovitz, called Waking Up on Memorial Day. I woke up this morning thinking about you. My eyes opened and I immediately began the usual involuntary inventory of what I might do today, the assorted plans I have, what I'm going to eat, the ordinary tasks before me, all the family stuff and bills and dreams and the billion unrelated thoughts already ping-ponging around inside my head while it still rested on the pillow. And almost in an instant, I became fully aware that I was awake and alive. I realized that I am here in this bed, breathing, feeling, planning, and preparing to rise to step into all of the waiting world. And that's when I thought of you. I thought about this day and about how you're missing it, about the other ones like it that you've missed before that I never considered. I thought about how many of those days I took for granted or squandered, complaining or worrying or missing what and who was right in front of me. I thought about those who are missing you today too. The loved ones and lovers who must settle for photographs and memories. It reminded me again of the unfathomable blessing of those who share my sacred mundane with me every day. It seems terribly insignificant, almost insulting, to offer an easy thank you for your service and your sacrifice, because honestly, it's all too much for me to even comprehend. I've never died for anything. I've never spent everything on behalf of someone or something else. I am awake and alive here in this morning, and you are not. And so I will find in those truths as fitting a reply as I can to you and to your life. I will live today as a response of gratitude. I will be fully present in this day and to those who share it with me. I will remember you, what you are missing, and those who are missing you. I will fight for the best version of this country that I can make. In some small way, as I run and plan and hug and laugh and eat and rest and do the act of simply living, I will remember that I am here. I will try to live well this day that you cannot. In this way, my very life will be a memorial day to yours. I am grateful that I thought of you today when I woke up. I know that I will see this day differently now. I hope that I will live it better. Thank you for opening my eyes. And thank you for waking me up.
Thank you so much, Becky. What beautiful readings. What a beautiful way to remember those who have sacrificed for us. So this morning, I chose the topic of respecting our differences. And I want to tell you why I chose that topic. There have been articles in several newspapers, including the Washington Post, about how Asians are being cursed at, spat at, and beaten up just because of how they looked. There are stories of COVID patients refusing to be treated by Asian doctors or nurses. And it brought the stories home so vividly to me because the lady you just saw do those readings, the woman I love so much, is third generation Asian American. And this week, I was speaking to a friend, and we were speaking about those articles, and he said to me, he said, you better not let Becky go out alone. You better go with her. And to be really honest, to be candid, I had thought that myself. But hearing the words come from somebody else was really, really shocking to me. Imagine my wife, who grew up in Idaho, who is as American as any of us, might be vulnerable for how she looks. So today, I want to address that. Just think, wouldn't it be really boring if all of us were the same? If we all looked the same? If we all prayed the same? If we all had the same interests? You know, it's one of the things we always talk about, how we're all unique and how when we accept our differences, life becomes more interesting. I read a blog this week by a lady named Celine Chenoy, and she wrote that discrimination comes from fear, that when we're open, we learn new things. When we're open, everybody has the potential to be a teacher. You know, accepting somebody who's different doesn't mean we agree with them, and it doesn't mean we have to approve them. Rumi wrote many years ago, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. You know, he was telling us we're one. There's no need for shaming or blaming. Just this morning, before I began doing this, I read something I want to share with you. This author said that during the Bolshevik Revolution, that thousands of people were rounded up, stripped naked, and shot in the back of the head. And the person who was an eyewitness to this wrote, most of the victims usually requested a chance to say goodbye. And because there was no one else, they embraced and kissed their executioners. We all have a sense of needing connectiveness. And when that's not there, we feel lost and missing and wounded. When that connection isn't there, we experience alienation and a sense of separation. So we reach out and we ache for contact. Stephanie Dowick wrote, the potential to care is one of our most precious gifts. It makes us feel safer, less vulnerable, and less isolated. You know, infants believe that they're the center of the universe. When they're happy, they smile, and when they're not, they let you know it. But as we grow up and as we mature, we realize that other lives matter. And we all want safety, we want respect, we want trust, we want kindness, we want love, and we want happiness. And when we care about others' feelings, we learn empathy. When we think, why should I be nice to her when she was rude to me? Or, I'm not going to talk to him because he hurt my feelings. Then we're letting other people decide how we'll behave. We give up our power to decide. When we treat other people decently because we can, we're relying on our own values rather than reacting. You know, in today's world, we're encouraged to concentrate on ourselves. But when we expand our capacity to love, we become more secure. We don't feel the need to react and to react how others are treating us. In the Course of Miracles, it's written, the holiest place on earth is where an ancient hatred has become a present love. In the book, The Spirit of Imperfection, Ernest Kurtz and Kathleen Ketchum tell this story. An old black man who is very religious applies for membership in an exclusive church, and the pastor tries to put him off. And the fellow becomes aware he's not really wanted. So he says to the pastor, you know, I think I'll pray on it and see what God says to me. And he comes back a few days later, and the pastor says to him, so, did you receive a message? And the old man says, yes, sir. He told me it wasn't any use. He said, I've been trying to get into that same church myself for 10 years, and I still can't make it. We are all imperfect. And our shared weaknesses, that's what creates community. We know that we're all flawed. We're all imperfect. We all have demons. We all have stress. And we all have sorrows. But we do the best with what we have. So let me give you a lighter example, okay? So there's a man who really takes great pride in his lawn. It's important to him. And then he starts to get dandelions, and he can't get rid of them. He tries everything, and no matter what he does, he's still got dandelions. So one day, in desperation, he writes to the agriculture department, and he tells them everything he has tried. And he says, so what shall I do? And a few weeks later, he gets the response which simply says, we suggest you learn to love them. Many years ago, the philosopher Philo wrote, be kind to everyone you meet, because everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. In the book, Caring Enough to Confront, David Ausberger asks the question, whose fault is it when things go wrong? And he answers, blame is useless. Love ends blamelessness and gives us the right questions to be asking, such as, what is the truly loving and responsible thing to do now? Where do we go from here? Loving is owning responsibility. In one of her books, Mary Morrissey tells the story of a woman named Pat who puts her mother in a nursing home. And as she's leaving, Pat says to one of the attendants, this woman isn't one of my favorite people. They never had a close relationship. And now her mother has suffered a stroke, and she's very angry. She's missing her husband, and she slurs her words. And Pat writes that the visits were really painful. They consist of Pat telling her mother the latest things her kids did, watching a half hour of Jeopardy, and then leaving. And one day Pat goes home, and she starts to look through some of her mother's boxes. and she sees presents that her mother has bought for her and never given her. And there's loving notes like, "Dear Pat, I thought you would love this. Love your mother. Pat, I thought you would enjoy this. Love, Mom." And Pat wonders, why didn't she ever give them to me? She knows I'm going to see them after she passes. And then Pat realized that her mother never gave her those gifts because she thought she would reject them. And she was right. So Pat gets up and she drives to the nursing home, not knowing what she's going to say or do, but hoping God would lead her. And she gets there, and rather than sitting in a chair, she sits on her mother's bed, takes her hand, and says, "I'm sorry, Mom, for pushing you away all these years." And her mother says in a very clear voice, "I love you." And there's more to it, but the point of it is that we need to embrace our differences, not just tolerate them. You know, we all know difficult people. They sap our energy and they can make us really angry. But we don't have to let circumstances determine how we're going to behave. We can't avoid unpleasant people, and coping with them in a loving way is very difficult. It takes practice. Mary writes, "God's plan encompasses all relationships, even the difficult ones. They offer us the opportunity to think about who we want to be. And when the going gets rough, we can find God even in the most difficult people." Jack Kornfield, the Buddhist teacher, talks about his dad. Growing up, his dad was a very difficult person. He was violent and he was abusive. But along the years, Jack made his peace with him, and Jack loves him. Now his dad is in the hospital, lying in bed and dying. And he's not a believer, but he's really scared of dying. And so Jack sits with him. And one day Jack says to his dad, "I gotta go. I gotta get some sleep." And his dad said, "Please don't go. Please don't leave me alone." And so Jack stays. And they hold hands. They don't speak much. Jack holds his hand. And eventually his dad passes. And this is what Jack writes: "Perhaps this is the best we can do. Help when we can, to witness each other with kindness, to offer our presence, to show the trust we have in life. Spiritual life isn't about knowing much, but about loving much." You know, we don't have to love and we don't have to like those we disagree with. Another's reasons for being how they are may be invisible to us, but another's way is worthy of respect. So I want to close with a story by Reverend John Powell, who taught in Loyola Marymount University. And he tells a story about a young man named Tommy, who was in Powell's Theology of Faith class. Well, Tommy was an atheist, and he questioned everything that Powell taught. He was a real pain in the rear. And when he was turning in his final exam, Tommy said to Powell, "Do you think I'll ever find God?" And Powell said, "No." And Tommy said to him, "Oh, I thought that was the product you were pushing." And Powell said, "No, I'm not pushing anything." Well, a few years go by, and Powell hears that Tommy was ill, and he meant to go see him, but it never happened. And one day, Tommy shows up at Powell's office, and he looks at him, and Tommy is 6 feet tall, and he weighs 100 pounds, and he has no hair because of the chemo that he's going through. And he said to Powell, you know, I never looked for God. There was so much fun to be had, so much drinking, so many girls to date, and on and on. And he said, and one day there was a lump, and they told me it was cancer. And I started to pray, but God didn't come. And then it got worse, and they told me I didn't have much time. And I still prayed, and still no God. It was like I thought God was an errand boy. I would pray and he would come. But it didn't work like that. And then I remembered you telling us how difficult your dad was, how he hid his feelings. So I decided not to hide mine. And I went to my dad, who was a really tough nut to crack. And he was reading the newspaper. And I said, Dad, put the paper down. And he lowered it like this. And I said, Dad, I love you. And he dropped the paper to the floor. And we stayed up all night talking, maybe for the first time, touching one another. And I went to my brother, my younger brother, and I told him I was sorry for all the times I wouldn't let him play with me and my friends. And I told him through it all, I love you. And he said, and then suddenly, God was there. God found me rather than me finding God. He said, when you open the doors of your heart to love, God walks in through those open doors. Here it is. When we're willing to look past our differences, when we open our heart to one another, right there in the middle of it is God. So it doesn't matter if it's a father who's a tough nut, or a brother, or a doctor, or a nurse who looks different, or a little girl growing up in Idaho. God is there when we open up. And what more could we ask for? Ernest Holmes wrote, "The peace of God is universal, all-inclusive. This does not mean all-embracing. This does not mean everything should be reduced to sameness. Uniformity, life has set the stamp of individuality upon everything, from a blade of grass to a person. There is a unity at the center, variety at the surface." I want to close with Ernest Holmes' prayer for world peace. "The earth is the Lord's, and fullness thereof. I know there is but one mind, which is the mind of God, in which all people live and move and have their being. I know there is a divine pattern for humanity, and within this pattern there is infinite harmony and peace, cooperation, unity, and mutual helpfulness. I know that the mind of man, being one with the mind of God, shall discover the method, the way, and the means best fitted to permit the flow of divine love between individuals and nations. Thus, harmony, peace, cooperation, unity, and mutual helpfulness will be experienced by all. I know there shall be a free interchange of ideas, of cultures, of spiritual concepts, of ethics, of educational systems, and of scientific discoveries, for all good belongs to all alike. I know that because the divine mind has created us all, we are bound together in one infinite and perfect unity. In bringing about world peace, I know that all people and all nations will remain individual but unified for the common purpose of promoting peace, happiness, harmony, and prosperity. I know that deep within every person, the divine pattern of perfect peace is already implanted. I now declare that in each person and in leaders of thought everywhere, this divine pattern moves into action and form, to the end that all nations and all people shall live together in peace, harmony, and prosperity forever. And so it is now. God bless you. Thank you for watching. Peace, and have a joyful week.